Hello everyone, nubkeks here. Welcome back to Nub Raids. I'm fresh out of the shower, and you know what that means. The brain has been massaged by the water and the shampoo, and we're good to go for a deep dive, for a thoughtful video. It's always the way here. It's my favorite videos are always the post-shower videos for the channel. What I want to talk about though today, bit more of a serious, bit more of a downbeat topic. Unfortunately, I want to talk about the state of the game, the state of Raid Shadow Legends in 2023. How have things been going? And also a bit about how things are looking for the future as well. When new content comes out in the game, I like to give an initial impression, but I don't like to kind of form a more final opinion until the thing has been out for a little while. I've got a good feel for it, how it's actually going. We get over the honeymoon phase, and we start to actually break it down and see strategies emerge. And when stuff has been out for a while, then I feel more confident about giving a proper thought on things. And that's what I want to do today, is to give a proper thought on some of the stuff in the game, because unfortunately, I actually think, looking back on it, there's been a lot of bad stuff, unfortunately. A lot of mistakes made in adding things to the game recently. In the interview that Scratch did with Cirilla, I think earlier this week, Cirilla said that they are aware of this problem where when players who get Romantu leave the game. Okay, so there's a big end game problem in Raid Shadow Legends right now. And they've added a lot of endgame stuff, but it doesn't seem to be helping. Let me break down why I think that might be the case. I'm going to try to be as objective as possible, but it's always difficult. The first thing to talk about would be Live Arena. Let's touch on that, the newest feature. I think Live Arena has had a very mixed reception. Some people like it. A lot of people seem to hate it as well. I think one of the biggest problems at Live Arena simply is that losing isn't fun. I think that's a fundamental design problem with this mode, is that you're going to lose by design of how it works. You're going to lose a lot, and losing isn't fun. And I think especially for the newer players that are coming in, even coming into bronze, newer players that don't have these OP champions, that cannot successfully climb up because they just haven't been playing for long enough. They haven't potentially spent enough money, according to Plarium's way of thinking, as it were. I think that drags it down when you come into this mode and it's, I got stomped again by people with better champions, stomped again by people with better gear. It's just a very frustrating experience. And honestly, that's something that's hard in a Live Arena format. That's something that's really hard to fix. Something that's very hard to fix. So I'll talk about what I'd like to see changed at the end. One thing I would like to see changed would be to just give you more rewards based off of losing, right? So let's say you get half of the medals for losing, so you still get stuff. You can still make progress even if you're losing. I think that would be nice. If this was just Live Arena battles instead of wins to get this chest, I think that would be really nice as well. Just having more stuff in there, so you're getting good stuff out of it even if you go in and you lose, so you don't need to take winning so seriously. I think that would be a nice thing. Another problem with this is a very limited pool of champions. I've seen some, I should have got the meme, I didn't think about it, but I've seen some memes that like gold Live Arena, for example, is just Taras Mariska, Sifi, Lockout, Jorgid, Brotus, maybe UDK, Helicath in there now, as well as things that can sort of frustrate that particular meta. But it's a very narrow meta, and I think that's even true in the lower stages as well, is that the number of champions that are good are actually quite small. And again, I think that leads to frustration. I think it's a pretty big problem. Also, the fact that you need to have gear on your champion. So it's not like you can be like, oh, maybe this would be a fun fight to bring in this random damage dealer I've never used before. Well, you can only have your best gear on certain champions. So that also really limits, just by design, it limits your flexibility and your creativity. You have to really intentionally build champions for this, and that's a problem. And it's also very time intensive. It just takes a lot of time to do these fights. I'm glad actually they announced this. They're going to be adding instant completion into Demon Lord Clan Boss. I think that's a really good thing, to just instantly finish your key here. So that's going to save people a lot of time every day that's spent just mindlessly running this. And I think that will open up Live Arena a bit more. I definitely think there clearly have been problems. The fact that they've actually made Demon Lord instant for the first time, I think shows that there's a problem there. They came in, I don't know where it says it actually, but they came in and they reduced the amount of points you lose for losing in silver. They did that because I think what likely was happening was people got to silver and then it was just an absolute bloodbath and you weren't moving anywhere. And people just said, hey, it's not fun, right? This losing isn't fun. And they stopped doing the mode. That's what I did, to be honest with you. I wasn't even losing that much even, to be honest, but it was just too slow of a grind. It was like, it's not that rewarding. So yeah, hopefully they'll keep making small changes like that. But like I said, Live Arena, I think it is a fun mode. It's competitive and I actually do quite enjoy it. But I think it's had pretty mixed reception. Going on to, let's look at the dungeons. They haven't done anything new with Campaign 4 forever. We've had new dungeons though, and these have been, again, I would say extremely mixed. So the first new dungeon we had was the Iron Twins. Looking back on this now, I can confidently say that the Iron Twins, unfortunately, is simply a bad boss. I think how I would describe it is that the Iron Twins is kind of like a bad Demon Lord clan boss, right? You think about Iron Twins, you think about Demon Lord. Both of these bosses, they do crazy amounts of damage, hit really hard, and that damage ramps up. And unkillable teams have been a popular answer to both of these. I think where the big difference comes in is with the Demon Lord. Number one, the rewards are extremely good for Demon Lord. That's a big difference. The rewards for Iron Twins, we'll talk about that more in a second, but they're really bad, really bad. But number two, with Demon Lord clan boss, there are an absolute ton of viable damage options for Demon Lord, and also a ton of viable options for team composition and strategy. And I think a big part of that is actually how the key system for this boss works. So like you can come in and you can one key with a team like this from Daimyo, but if you've got a worse team, you can come in and, for example, I think Deadwood Jedi, maybe 2 or 3 months into a free-to-play account, was able to 4-key Ultra Nightmare Clan Boss. I'm pretty sure that's what he did. Him and YST, very close together, neck-and-neck race, free-to-play accounts, they could actually take it down in 4 keys. So the fact that you can invest more keys to get your rewards, to get the same rewards, if you've got a weaker team, that's cool. It opens up way more strategies, way more viable champions, and you can keep improving this and working on it over time. When you come to Iron Twins, you don't have that, right? It's either you can beat stage 15 or whatever, you can beat whatever stage you're on, or you can't. There's no running it again. And as a result, the teams that are viable, there's just almost none, right? It's basically you cheese the boss with an unkillable team, and it's really slow. Or you use Geomancer. You can use like a normal team with Geomancer, or you can use an unkillable team with Geomancer. But Geomancer is basically the only way to do this anyway quickly. It's just bad design, right? It's basically locked behind cheesing the boss with Geomancer and bypassing his cleanse mechanic, and just avoiding all of the damage, ignoring the Iron Brand mechanic because you've brought unkillable in. And yeah, there's just no real good damage options apart from Geo. It's really bad. It's really bad. Like I said, on top of that, the rewards are really low. You get so few soul stones from these coins. The essences are very sparse as well. I honestly think on Void, on Sunday, they doubled the rewards. I really feel like that should be the baseline always. And yeah, I don't know what they could do to fix this. I feel like this needs a fairly big change up, and that makes me worried that they're not going to do too much. I think the easiest thing would be to just up the rewards at this point, and that would help. One thing that could be quite fun would be to make reflect damage actually relevant. There's lots of reflect damage champions in the game, and it's just basically useless. It would be kind of fun if, because Geomancer strat, making that more broadly applicable, make the boss take, 10 times more damage when reflect damage reflects stuff back at him. And then you can bring in all of those reflect damage. Let me actually look at this. Raid, reflect, damage. Let's see, how many champions are there? You guys can see this. So in terms of like reflect damage for your team, like there's quite a chunk of champions in here. Geomancer is like the only one that's really relevant, but there's a few. There's reflect damage on the target. There's a few reflect damage on themselves, small reflect damage on the team. Like that would be fun, right? To at least bring that in as another viable option. And reflect damage is, like I said, effectively useless everywhere right now. So that'd be cool. But yeah, Iron Twins have been pretty terrible. The energy cost sucks as well. Realistically, right? I do like that we get soul stones now in events and stuff. I think that's cool, but we've just had the our first soul stone tournament, and the amount of soul stones you need to get anything good out of it has been absolutely crazy. And on top of that, they've also confirmed that these are not going to be part of fusions in the near future. So I think at least for the rest of 2023, you know, soul stones are not going to be important for fusions. That was my worry. And why I was recommending to people, you should do Iron Twins Fortress, was, hey, they might come out and say the next fusion, you're going to need soul stones. Looks like that's not going to be the case for a good while. And honestly, between the energy cost, the time investment, and how limited this is, like if you don't have an Iron Twins team, it's kind of one of those things where sadly you say it's probably not even worth the hassle for the most part. You can kind of just ignore it. And that's just bad game design. It's not good. Let's jump over to the other new dungeon, Sand Devil's Necropolis. Again, I think a very bad dungeon. Unfortunately, a very, very bad dungeon. Again, it's got the same problem. It's extremely limited in the strategies that you can use. So for example, for stage 24, I use Godseeker to cheese it. I think this is what most people are going to be doing. It's just, again, cheesing the boss, right? He's got all of these mechanics, all of this stuff. You know, sleeping the boss is apparently supposed to be a thing. You can sleep him and put on debuffs. You know, he takes less damage and all of this. It's like you go, you know what? This is just too difficult. There's just too much stuff here, too many stats required. It's just too hard. And there's just so few champions that open up viable strategies for this. Like I've seen some teams with like Riho Bone Spear, maybe Sifi, maybe what's the lizard that can sleep, the Void Legendary Lizard that can sleep him. He shows up a little bit. Like there's some teams that can do this legit, but they're such cracking teams, right? It's ridiculous. Most people, it's just slap in Godseeker. She's going to survive his big hit with her passive, and we'll throw in somebody with burns, right? Or poisons or something that will do good damage to him when he self-sleeps himself, and then we'll just try to survive, and we just cheese it with Godseeker passive and her revive, because she revives champions with all their cooldowns, off cooldown. So yeah, it's just cheese, basically, for the higher levels. I think that's just really bad. It's just bad. You know, when you've got these bosses that are supposed to have interesting mechanics, and you come in and you're just like, we're just going to ignore those mechanics because it's too difficult. And that's been a pretty consistent problem, actually. So I actually have a list here of bosses that you can cheese. Here we go. I don't know if this is comprehensive. I just jotted this together before recording this video. So I do think maybe like turn meter control arguably could be cheese. So like original Spider and original Fire Knight, like arguably coming in with champions like Coldheart and Armiger and stuff like that, and just keeping their turn meter down and never letting them take a turn, arguably that is a cheese mechanic as well. But I think the difference there is that there are so many champions, viable champions, that are good at turn meter control. So there's a lot of options there. But I do have to note that it's sort of accepted now, but maybe probably originally, as the designers originally intended, it's probably not how they intended those fights to go. I think Scarab in Doom Tower is a cheese fight. I'm actually on it right now, but I didn't run it for this video because I wanted to jump around. But Scarab, a cheese fight, you need shields, otherwise he counterattacks. And again, it's so difficult for most players to do this properly, legitimately, that a lot of people are just going to commit. Like, you can do some of it legitimately, but a lot of people are just coming in and cheesing it. Like this team looks like it's actually legit, for example, with Valkyrie and stuff. But a lot of folks, it's just come in and cheese it with something like Eurost. Basically someone that can just survive and poison the boss. Eurost, Tomb Lord, I think Mithrala can do it, that sort of stuff. Vergis, Epic, that's how I did it originally, was with not Bannerlords and High Elves. Was it Vergis? Who self-shields with his passive, and he self-heals. It's just cheesing the boss because it was too difficult to do it normally. Bommel, I think, is one of the big ones, right? Bommel takes more damage from bombs. You can freeze the bombs that he spawns in as well, right? The big side minion bombs, you can freeze those. Nobody does that, right? Nobody uses those mechanics. It's just too difficult. I think that, you know, with Nishak coming out, we now have the Bommel one-shot where we use bombs. You can also use bombs with Astrolith, I guess. But for the most part, people are just cheesing it, again, with things like, again, Godseeker, things like Vogoth, that sort of stuff. The boss was just too hard to do normally, and was just a big wall for most people. It's like, how do I even start doing this boss? Was, I think, the situation for most people when it came out. Hydra, when Hydra first came out, for the first month, Deterrence was super bugged. Well, not bugged, but super overpowered. It didn't have a cooldown. It does now. This is the Mastery. Do any of you guys remember this? I wonder, probably a lot of you weren't even playing back then. We come into the masteries, Deterrence is this one. So this now has a 1-turn cooldown. This didn't have a cooldown before, and you just had a chance to counterattack an enemy whenever they applied these debuffs. And what you would do was just put in all AoE A1 champions, things like, you know, Sinacia, Skullcrown, whatever. Who's a big one? A big one was a champion you never see anyone really use. Battle Sage was a big one with a speed aura, and she had this AoE A1. I think she could also increase attacks. That was quite useful to make your damage hit harder. But you just had an entire team with Inquisitor Shamael and then 5 AoE A1 champions. And because they were all doing AoE, they would all always hit the Head of Torment, the head that would fear you. And then they would basically just infinitely chain all these AoE A1s and just blow up all the Hydra heads. That was quite a funny thing of cheese. They nerfed Deterrence then after that to stop it. Iron Twins, I'd consider to be sort of a cheese boss with Geomancer. Sand Devil, definitely a cheese boss. Nogdar, originally, that was hilarious. Nogdar could one-shot the boss because this move that does not work against bosses did. That was fun. That's how I have all of the stages beaten in 8 seconds. And yeah, it's still very cheesy with again, God's Secret. Another very common strategy, but like, do you have the time to do it, is Cronam, right? If you get Cronam, which is the miserable referral program, you can do it as well. So yeah, it's silly. Fire Knight Hard, I think, is kind of cheese. I say that in the sense that, again, Fire Knight Hard is supposed to the big thing with that is now freeze. You can see I'm just farming stage 2. I don't even care, man. I don't even care. But stage 2, hard mode, freeze depletes his turn meter. I do use a freeze team for this, and I just haven't. It could work on stage 6, but I haven't bothered gearing the champions up enough to make that viable. I've had so many other things to do, especially farming oil. I'm still in the farming oil stage for me, that I was kind of like, I'll put this off for a while and hopefully they'll nerf this boss. But yeah, you're supposed to use freeze, but you can't, right? I thought this was funny. If I look in, right, and I say, okay, find me a team with my account. I've been playing for 2.5 years. I'm a content creator for this game. I've spent money on this game, right? Find me a team that can do Fire Knight Hard stage 10. Find me a team. This is the Hell Hades optimizer. Nothing. I say, okay, you know what? I'll even take a 1% success rate team. 1%. That's all I care about. I don't care. Any success rate. Apply the filter. Nothing. Nothing. There is no possible team in my account that can beat stage 10. That's crazy. And how do you beat stage 10? Well, basically, there's 2 champions that are really core to beating it. Valkyrie and Cardiel. Right? They're sort of the 2 meta champions. I think you can do it without Cardiel. I think maybe you can do it without Valkyrie, but I think it's very difficult. Typically, an Acrisia is involved to do it in good speed as well. But it's just ridiculously hard. And I just impossible, right? It's just really... It's sort of the issue with these dungeons, right? Is they are ridiculously overtuned in terms of stats and ridiculously limited in terms of the viable champions that are available to do it. To the point where, 2.5 years in, I'm just like, you just can't do it. You just can't do it. Go pull a Valkyrie, basically. Go pull a Valkyrie and Cardiel, and then maybe you can do it, but it's probably still going to be too slow. I honestly genuinely think what they did with Fire Knight, because when it first came out on the test server, it was the easiest of the hard mode dungeons, and then they massively buffed it up. I think the reason they did that, honestly, was just to keep Krakens busy, right? Was to give them a reason to up their Fire Knight with the Great Hall area bonuses, was to just get them super hyped about upping Fire Knight, just to keep them busy, give them something to do with their Cardiels and Acrisias, I genuinely think that's sort of what it was. It's not really content that's designed to be doable for a normal person. It's just overtuned for the Krakens. And I suspect when they add more stages, because they'll add higher stages of hard mode. I think when they add in more stages, then they might come in and actually nerf Fire Knight lower stages back down to a reasonable level. But yeah, my point is, and I'm worried. Where have I gone? I'm worried about this new dungeon, the new one that's coming out for ascending accessories. I'm worried that will be the similar thing, because a lot of the recent bosses, a lot of them have been basically designed in a couple of ways, ridiculously hard on stats and ridiculously limited on viable champions, to the point where simply cheesing them becomes the way to go. And it is a problem that exists a good bit back into, like, Scarab and Bommel have been around for a long time now. Iron Twin, Sand Devil, Fire Knight Hard, these are newer. So it's more frequently happening nowadays, but it was something that even was happening before. So it is a worrying trend with the game. And I think there are great Doom Tower bosses that don't require cheese. I think actually the other hard mode dungeons are actually quite good. I've been actually a big fan of hard mode Dragon, Ice Golem, and Spider. I think they've all been fun. And yeah, I think it's a problem. Also, I will say, Doom Tower bosses, you do them potentially just, you have to beat the hardest stage or whatever that you're on once a month. So it's a bit better if these bosses are ridiculously hard. But I think these dungeon bosses, they're dungeon bosses. For me, I would say realistically, a dungeon is something that should be farmed in I'd say less than 3 minutes. Preferably, I'd say around 2-minute farm time should be sort of the average point. The typical point for doing these, for a dungeon run, in my opinion, is what it should be. Now, I don't know if Plarium agrees with that at all. I don't know if you generally agree with that at all. But I would say, 2 minutes or less is a pretty good time for farming these dungeons, right? These are things that you farm regularly, I think the difficulty, I think it should be a challenge to build a team, but it should be doable. And then I think it should be more flexible that, if you're a whale, if you're a kraken, if you've got good luck, if you're smart, if you build a good team, you can bring your farm time down. I think that should be the goal, but you should still be able to farm them, even with a bad team. It shouldn't be a thing of like, well, you just can't farm it. It's either you can do it or you can't. That's just silly for a dungeon. So that's what we've got going on there. Let's go through this a bit quicker because this is already very long. So Iron Twins was that. I do think that seeing Soul Stones and seeing oil in events is actually really good. I'm actually quite a fan of those. Hard dungeons, I said again, they're generally very good. History of cheese bosses. Let's come to Awakening Gear. And then Awakening Champions with Blessings. So I actually don't mind Awakening Gear. I think there are problems for sure in terms of stat inflation. We'll talk about that in a minute. But generally speaking, I actually find Awakening Gear is it's got pros and cons, right? So it's a huge grind. There's no question. Now, whether that's good or bad, it's more more open-ended thing. And on the one hand, I don't mind it that much. Like it's kind of boring to farm out that dungeon, but then a lot of the game is sort of boring, just farming campaign, farming dungeons. The farming itself is not very interesting. And the whole game is a huge grind, so I don't mind the huge grind too much. I'm kind of okay with that. I've made my peace. And like I said, I'm very happy that you can get oils now from actual other events. I think that they've been really fun rewards. I think it's a mix of frustration and excitement. So this is where my opinion might differ from others, because I've seen a lot of people really dislike so for example, right here, this is not a very good piece of gear, but like imagine this is amazing. I think a lot of people feel that they get this. Imagine this was a god tier piece of gear, but then you roll a flat ascension on it, a flat awakening, and you go, oh, my piece of gear is ruined. I think that's how a lot of people feel when you get a bad ascension, that it's ruined your piece of gear. I don't actually feel that way. I think the reason I don't feel like that, for me personally, is because I've always been behind on gear. You guys will know, whenever they do that like yearly recap video, I'm always really low on the dungeons farmed. Like coming up as a content creator, I've been really focused on just leveling up all the different champions to do videos on them, mastering them up, doing Minotaur. I farm Minotaur like crazy, so I haven't really reached that late game stage. I'm getting to it more now. But before this, I hadn't really been getting there of having this god tier gear. But I think that's where a lot of frustration can come from, is that if you had been end game before and you had this crazy good gear that was basically perfect, and then they add in this new system and suddenly your gear isn't perfect anymore, I think that's where the frustration comes from. But I could be wrong, and maybe this is something that's commonplace throughout the community. For me, though, I think there is a bit of a positive to it, which is, when you come in and you do get a good ascension on a piece of gear, that for me actually makes for a pretty fun gameplay moment. Like when you come in and you get a pair of speed boots and you get that speed ascension on them, you're like, oh, let's go, this is big, this is huge. When you get your crit damage gloves and they roll crit damage on them, right? That's pretty exciting. So that's the thing there. There's a lot of randomness. There's a lot of frustration in the system because you can roll bad stuff and do roll bad stuff more often than not. But on the positive, I actually do enjoy that there is quite a bit of excitement when you do get a new piece of gear and rebuilding your champions and seeing them actually get much stronger as well because of it. I do actually like that aspect of it. I think that aspect has actually worked quite well, in my opinion. Now, it does lead to a broader problem of stat inflation, which we'll touch on as well. Blessings, on the other hand, I think are a disaster. I think they're absolute garbage. Now they've been out for a while. I was very excited for blessings, for this cool way to customize your champions with these different effects, but that's just not been the case. So way too top heavy. A lot of blessings only really do stuff when they are 5 or 6 star ascended. They're basically useless before that. That's a massive problem. So for example, bone armor, you know, like at 1 star, you start with 1 bone armor stack that reduces damage received by 20%. That's it. It's gone. When you go up to like 6 star, you're starting with 3 bone armor. Whenever you attack and do bonus damage, you regenerate bone armor. Like, it's a completely different blessing at that point. I think maybe a more straightforward example, Soul Reaper, right? You can execute people at 4 or 8% HP. Like, it's so low, you barely even notice this exists. Whereas executing them at 14 or 20% is much more significant. I don't mind the stats being there as much, but I actually think the blessing effects themselves, like commanding presence, strengthening your aura by 2.5%, like this is basically nothing. Whereas coming up to even, 15% is even pretty bad. When you get to 35%, it's like, okay, it's a bit better. Or like intimidating presence, hey, 35% and weaken the enemy one by 20%. At least that's sort of something. But yeah, that's sort of a big problem with blessings, is that aside from the stats, the actual effects of the blessings are so weak at lower tiers that it's just not interesting. They just don't work. A lot of these blessings, they might as well not exist at lower tiers. It's just kind of nice to get a little bit of stats at 2 star more than anything. That's a big problem. On top of that, a lot of blessings are just bad, right? Indomitable Spirit is just bad. 5% chance to block debuffs. Like, come on, it's just a waste of time. And they've buffed these and it's still bad with no cooldown. Like, I would rather, instead of this being like a 5% chance to block one of these debuffs with a 1-turn cooldown, I'd rather it be, this will block stun, sleep, or fear, but have whatever, a 10-turn cooldown. Even, like, I don't care. That's stupid. It's still stupid, but at least it's useful. Whereas a 5% chance is totally useless. There are many blessings in here that are totally useless, that see no use. I think that's what it comes down to, right? There are very few actual interesting choices to be made. In terms of gameplay, there's basically no interesting choices, right? Slap Brimstone, I guess, on PvE champions at accuracy. It's pretty good. Cruelty's pretty good. That's all right. Phantom Touch, if you're stuck, and yeah, Polymorph to cheese some arena, and that's it. I think Life Harvest is very strong as well, actually, even at Mid-Awakening, but it's nowhere near as interesting as it should be. This would be so much better if all of the blessings were actually genuinely good, even at low tier Awakening, if they had actual good effects, and there was an actual interesting choice. There's not an actual interesting choice here for the most part. It's very dull. The actual blessings is very bad. On top of that, it takes so long. Oh my god, I've scrolled way off. It takes way too long to get 5 and 6 star blessings for normal players. Like, I think most people, on top of that, on top of the blessings sucking when they're low star Awakening, it's really being pushed to buy soul stones, just buy our packs and get 5 and 6 star. That's what it is. Most players that are not buying the stuff, it's such a pay to win thing. Most people are probably sitting at maybe 1 or 2 star Awakening. Like, I've got a good few champions now at 2 star because I've been trying to focus on that for stats. I'm probably going to change that strategy though, so don't necessarily follow it. But you might have some at 1 star. You probably got a ton of champions at 0. That's probably where most people are. They have most of their champions probably not awakened at all, or they're maybe at 1, maybe at 2 star, and that's about it. I actually got quite lucky, and I've got 1 champion at 6 star, 1 champion at 5 star. And then 1 at 3, and then the rest are at 2 of the stuff I regularly use. And I've spent over $100 on Soulstone packs, So it's just blessings, I think, had a lot of potential. It's actually ended up being extremely bad. there's been a lot of stat inflation in the game as well, tying into this. So Faction Guardians, which is actually, I think, quite good. Champion Empowerment is a huge one. Gear Empowerment now. We're going to have Accessory Empowerment coming, Mythical Gear, Great Hall Area bonuses. The big question for me is, how is this going to affect content? So, right, when Plarium comes out now and brings out a new bit of content, and you've got Kraken, and like they particularly want to target the whales and the Krakens because they make them the money, right? That's where the money comes from. How do they make content? How do they make content when you've got whales and Krakens coming in with champions that are super empowered, that have fully empowered gear? They're going to have fully empowered accessories very quickly, maxed out Faction Guardians, mythical gear. They can max out their Great Hall bonuses even pretty quickly. How did they design content that is relevant for them, but also still relevant for regular players? Like, when the game was 1 year old, when it was 2 years old, designing content that is relevant for the Krakens, but will also be relevant for other people, wasn't as difficult because the gap was smaller. But that gap is getting absolutely, absolutely massive. I just thought I'd show you this for fun. This was a video I recorded thanks to Panda from Sacred Panda's clan. I just thought this was fun. I didn't know what I was doing on his account, but he gave me a go to try out some of his teams and stuff like that. But I just thought seeing, like, look at that double hit against the Romantu. That's a fun bug. And now Romantu has no health bar. Like, the difference between, where we were a while ago, where we are now for the Krakens, right? The gulf is just massive, right? The gulf is bigger than ever before. And that's just my worry. How is this going to affect content moving forwards? Yeah, like I do, like I said, this is part of why I feel like these cheesing dungeons, like Fire Knight Hard, is very worrying to me, because Fire Knight Hard is like, okay, this is literally designed designed for people with all of the legendaries, right? With crazy gear that are maxing out live arena stats to make it better, right? It's really designed for that. And I mean, it's not that big of a deal for this. Like, you can just farm a lower stage, but I think it's still different from the rest of the game where you could actually beat stuff. I'm just, like I said, I'm more worried about this moving forwards. Will Fire Knight Hard become a trend? And how does it not become a trend? Like, how do they release something that everyone can beat when you've got people with all this stuff in the mix as well? It seems crazy. Now, I will throw in, I'll give a couple of solutions in a second. I will just mention with summoning, there are more 10x events now than ever before, which I think is definitely wearing people out. And the cost of doing fusions is going up pretty consistently. It's been trending up, which to me is actually a massive negative. I think fusions are one of the best ways, one of the best things in the game. It's a main gameplay feature of the game, really, for newer players, right? Is you go in, you can do your fusions. It takes a lot of work, but you get your fusion champion, and that new legendary can make a big difference to your account. The cost of these fusions keeps going up, though. It just makes it harder and harder for new players to get in and to actually complete those fusions. I think it's a big problem. I think what Plarium is doing is, by pushing the cost of the fusions up, again, I think they're trying to keep the fusions difficult to do for later game players, I guess is what they're trying to do. To me, that doesn't make any sense. You're just going to alienate the new players that can't get into fusions sooner. I think it's a big mistake. I think fusions should be fairly accessible. It should be fairly accessible. It should be a fun thing to do every month, right? It should be relatively fun to do, and you get a cool champion out of it. That's what it should be. Part of a problem with this, I thought this was funny, Cirilla said this in the interview as well, is that there are too many champions. This is just a problem with the game getting older too. There are so many champions in the game now. So having fusions actually be interesting, again, when the game was 1-2 years old, having interesting fusions was much easier to do than having interesting fusions now with stuff being insane. Or even when they release new champions, like we go to Arena, right? For Krakens, especially, again, where lots of the money is coming from. Like if they release a damaged champion, let's say like Tatsu, who just came out, right? Tatsu, cool looking champion, but there's no hype for this champion because what use are they? You're going up against Jorgits, Taras, Harimas, this level of champion, right? Really, really overpowered nukers. This champion just cannot compete. So there's no hype. It becomes so difficult to release new champions as the game gets longer and people's champions collections grow that are actually interesting. And you also run into the issue then of them releasing extremely overpowered champions. The obviously best example, Tarasa Marishka coming in, just totally overpowered. And that's kind of like what Plarium decide they have to do, right? Okay, well, keep the Krakens interested. Here are these ridiculously overpowered champions that are just way better than everything else that exists in the game. Go buy lots and lots and lots of void shards to get these champions and empower them and run multiple copies. That's basically, you know, what it's come down to. And I think that starts to wear some people out as well. Yeah, it's just this danger of this real power inflation in the game too. How do they fix that? So I've got a few suggestions here. Maybe I was thinking of a fourth one and forgot. Let's delete that. I think that faction specific challenges is a pretty nice way to bring it in. So I was thinking about that with Tatsu. Like, Tatsu's just not exciting. But if they come in and they say, okay, you know, build on faction specific stuff, like, oh, there's like a fun live arena tournament with really good rewards, but you can only use Shadowkin champions, right? If that sort of thing becomes more common, then it's kind of like Faction Wars, right? Oftentimes when you pull a champion, imagine if Faction Wars didn't exist. How much of your roster would you never touch? Imagine if Hydra didn't exist. How much of your roster would you never touch? There'd be so many champions that you would pull and you go like, they're just kind of rubbish. Like, a lot of nukers get a chance to shine because they're good for their faction crypt, but they're not good in comparison to the top nukers in the game. So I think building on that idea of more factions or just more challenge-based stuff, like Force Affinity champions only, whatever. The type of thing they did in Secret Rooms. You could even mix up the Secret Rooms in Doom Tower. But I think more specific, limited challenges helps by limiting the champion pool available. That helps alleviate this too many champion problem. So I think that is something that they could add in that could be very fun. It's obviously more end game focused though. It's more end game because you need to have like a good set of Sylvan Watchers if it's Sylvan Watchers only or something. But I think that's a good way for them to go. I would love to see more live arena rewards, even for losing. I think that's an easy implement that makes that mode more fun. I think that's good. I think the quality of life with the clan boss was good. I talked a bit about Iron Twins and what I'd like to see change. I just think it's genuinely, you need quite a big change about Iron Twins and Sand Devil, honestly, to make them fun. They're such bad dungeons, unfortunately. They're such bad dungeons that it's going to take a lot to actually change them. So I'm not really sure. And then I think broadly speaking, I want to highlight this. Open-ended difficulty, I think, is something that's important. That's what I mentioned with Iron Twins, right? Iron Twins, you can do it or you can't do it. Whereas with Clan Boss, it's more open-ended, right? You can push for a record. You can push for a 1 key. You can 2 key it. You can 3 key it. You can 4 key it. There's quite a lot of variety in terms of what you can do there. And it also is interesting scaling up of difficulty and the rewards. So it feels quite rewarding. Yeah, again, I think your dungeon farming, right? Dungeon farming, that's another thing. It's like, okay, I can do it kind of fine. It's not that crazy hard for an endgame person, for example, to do stage 10 of Spider Heart. It's doable, but it's like, ooh, how fast can I get this, right? Lowering your time, it's open-ended difficulty. How quick, how efficiently can I do it? It's the open-ended stuff that I think is good. That is kind of why I'm excited for the Hydra Clash over here. So my OBS crashed in the middle of the recording. I guess the recording is too long. Give it a like if you've enjoyed this very long video. I'm kind of excited for the Hydra Clash. I think there's a bit of a balance problem in terms of OP champions and that stat inflation stuff coming in terms of being able... I'm going to feel a bit bad because maybe I'm not going to be able to compete at the highest levels. But I'm kind of okay with that. Like, it's just the way it is. And I think it'll be fun to come in and instead of being like, oh, I have to just 1 key. Now it's like, oh, how can I get the most damage out of this as possible? How can I maximize my team? Can I beat my previous record? It's that more open-ended, that sort of stretch goal idea. I think that works really well in this game and gives you the motivation to... It's just improving your teams gives you the motivation. I think building a team, binary difficulty, binary difficulty. Do I have Cardiel Lucrezia? Like, do I have Cardiel and Valkyrie? Yes. Oh, I can do it. No, I can't do it then. That's just stupid, right? But again, having the flexibility, I think that is really fun. So there you go. Let me know what you guys think as well. This video is already super long. I figured it's actually longer than I thought it would be. I'm sorry. But yeah, I wanted to just kind of break down my thoughts broadly on the game, where it's at. And yeah, looking back at it, and unfortunately, I do think I've kind of focused, I guess, more on the negative stuff in this video. Like there's been positive quality of life stuff coming in as well. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of draw attention to and address that problem of like, why do I feel that players are leaving? Why is there a bit more negativity around the game? And honestly, I think it's because looking back at the more recent releases in the game, let's be honest, a lot of them actually haven't been that good. They've not been like knock the ball out of the park successes that they probably want to be. So yeah, there you go. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.